I'm Claudia Bester. I'm the Director of Public Programs and Education, and I'm very pleased to introduce tonight's speakers for our 9th and final Red Book Dialogue. For tonight, our final program, we're going to look at some of the practical applications of C.G. Jung's work and his ideas, and also towards the Eastern religions that Jung helped to introduce to the European intellectual community. We'll talk a little bit about sand play therapy, active imagination painting, meditation, and much more. I'm very pleased to have with us here tonight the teacher Jack Kornfield, who many of you know from his books and tapes and seminars. Jack trained as a Buddhist monk in the monasteries of Thailand, India, and Burma. He's taught meditation internationally since 1974 and is one of the key teachers to introduce Buddhist mindfulness practice to the West. After returning to the United States, Jack co-founded the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, with fellow meditation teachers Sharon Salzberg and Joseph Goodstein. He's also a founding teacher of the Spirit Rock Center in Woodacre, California, where he currently lives and teaches. Jack's books have been translated into 20 languages and sold more than 1 million copies, including Teachings of the Buddha, Seeking the Heart of Wisdom, Living Dharma, After the Ecstasy, The Laundry, Stories of the Spirit, Stories of the Heart, and most recently, A Wise Heart, A Guide to the Universal Teachings of Buddhist Psychology. He holds a Ph.D. in clinical psychology and is married to a Jungian analyst. And tomorrow, Jack will be in a program at Inside LA in Santa Monica from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m., so you might be interested in joining him there. Now on to Katie. Katie Sanford was born in 1917, in the middle of the Russian Revolution, World War I, the suffrage movement, and during the heyday of Trotsky, Matahari, and Pancho Villa, and right in the middle of the time when Carl Jung was writing the Red Book. In 1955, while studying in the creative ferment of the C.G. Jung Institute in Zurich, her analytical work with Dr. Lillian Frey-Rohn led to consulting with C.G. Jung himself as well. In 1962, she returned to Zurich to lecture on the early symbolic paintings of her individual encounter with the collective unconscious. In 1978, Katie was certified as a Jungian analyst at the C.G. Jung Institute of LA. I'd like to note that was at age 60, which is fabulous. Her book, The Serpent and the Cross, Spanning the Split Through Active Imagination, which we have for sale in our bookstore upstairs, which documents through symbolic archetypal imagery the life-saving inner journey of her individuation process. The book, covering 30 years of her paintings, was published in her 89th year and has been recognized as a modern myth to be included in the C.G. Jung Institute of San Francisco's Archive for Research of Archetypal Symbols. Katie's a member of the Los Angeles and the San Diego Society of Jungian Analysts and is a founding member of the San Diego Friends of Jung. She has lectured internationally and continues her work with clients. At 93 years of age, after 65 years of marriage and 3 children, Katie finds this to be the richest, most rewarding time of her life. She's amazing. Her original paintings and collected works can be accessed through, no, not purchased, to be viewed at the Opus Archives at Pacifica Graduate Institute in Santa Barbara. And I must say, it's an honor and a pleasure to have someone of her experience and wisdom with us here tonight. We have a number of images tonight, both from the Red Book and from Katie Sanford's own work, as well as some images that Jack Kornfield has contributed. And I expect there will be some audience participation tonight as well, so get comfortable, and please join me in welcoming Jack Kornfield and Katie Sanford.
Madam. Good evening, Katie.
Well, delight to meet you face to face after our pleasant phone calls.
And good evening to you. It's really a pleasure to be here and also to be in the presence of the Red Book and what it represents for Jungian psychology. I want to thank the Hammer Museum and Claudia Bester and all of those who helped and especially to say to you, Katie, whose book that was mentioned, The Serpent and the Cross, was published some years ago before the Red Book came out, and is an extraordinary journey, as you'll see, of the images. After the death of your mother and the difficulty in your family and almost dying, you entered the underworld and you painted your way through it and out of it. And Katie writes at one point in the back, she says, much has changed since I began. The society's conventional, established, secular, religious containers are breaking down, and the hitherto repressed shadow of our patriarchal culture has been unleashed. Mother Nature's dark, unconscious forces are ravaging the land, being lived out through senseless violence, drugs, sex, and war. In our present age, it's no longer possible to kill our dragons. They are alive and stirring within the collective psyche. Because collectively we have not found a more conscious way to relate to them, we are being devoured by them. The collective unconscious has burst its bounds, and it is a requirement for us to come to terms with these forces individually and collectively. And so out of admiration for what you've done and written, I'm really happy to share the evening with you. Let me say a little bit about the Red Book, and then perhaps you'll say something as well about the time that it represents in time change. And that is that, actually I want to ask a question of you first. How many of you here are familiar, or either have been in Jungian therapy or are quite familiar with Jungian way of working, just to know? How many of you are relatively new to the work of Carl Jung? How many of you are connected with Buddhist meditation in some form also? That's great. How many are quite new to meditation? Virgins, even in LA, amazing. Okay. Let's see. How many of you would say that you are on some form of an inner journey? They're your people, Katie. You can see this, okay? You can see artists, educators.
I'll share them with you.
Yeah, thank you. So shortly after Jung's breakup with Freud, and just at the dawn of the First World War, Jung had had these visions of blood across the land in Europe and so forth. But within months of this separation from Freud, that was, I think, a really deep and traumatic separation, Jung began to have these visions that came to him. And at first he wasn't sure if he was going mad or not, although mostly he thought not. But in the course of several years of entering the terrain of the inner world and the descent that he took, listening to these voices and in some way trying to come to terms with those very forces that you named, Katie, he discovered the importance of mythological and archetypal patterns that are across all cultures in the world. He discovered the nature of the unconscious, the collective unconscious, in ways that were new to Western psychology. He understood in some ways how to come to terms with the suffering of humanity and looked into the question of good and evil that we're still faced with at this time. And if you read the book, it is in a way prophetic in the same way that reading Dante or William Blake is. He had a vision, vision after vision, in which his vision spoke to him of something that was outside of time. He talked about the spirit of the times in which we get lost in, the spirit of addiction and modern culture and what we're called the addicted society that wants to put us to sleep and just keep doing the same thing over and over again, whether it's individually or as a society, the materialism and the continuing racism and warfare that we see repeated, or what he called the spirit of the depths, in which one confronts the fundamental forces of fear and confusion and hatred and conflict and delusion in whatever forms they are to be found, and comes to some inner resolution or understanding of how to deal with these so that they're not placed upon others and not enacted in unconscious ways in the world. And this descent over those years then was recorded by him in the Red Book and became the material for most of the rest of his life's work.
And I would like to also say that that addiction, to me, but as an introvert, I may be a little prejudiced, but it's the addiction to this hyperactivity, this extroverted activity that leaves no time for an awareness of the inner world.
And the consequences of being so busy and multitasking and not being aware of the inner world is what?
Is, I think, a tremendous social suffering and individual neurotic suffering.
So it's as if we lose touch with what really matters to ourselves, and then we act it out in unconscious
And
ways.
act it out in very destructive ways.
And a few years ago, I got a call from one of the assistant deans at Sanford Business School and one of the senior professors asking if I could come and teach a day of mindfulness and attention to inner life to the entire student body and some of the faculty there. And I said, why are you asking for that? And they said, well, the people who come are very accomplished, these young students. They get in, they work really hard, they're the best in the country, they're headed toward corporate jobs and running things that make millions of dollars, but they lose themselves more and more in the process, and we need your help. And I listened for a bit, and I said, so what you're asking for is soul retrieval at Sanford Business School? And the professor said, yeah, pretty much something like that. So it's at every level in some way, because if we can't cross that abyss that connects us to ourselves, we don't live an authentic life.
I think that's true. And harsh as it may seem, I often think that the chaos that we're in today is a kind of remedial shift, because it's become so one-sided that the materialism that's been set up almost as a god has collapsed. And we're thrown into the chaos of our own emptiness.
Or we project that emptiness because we haven't been able to face the things that are unfinished or unknown in ourselves onto others. So James Baldwin wrote, I imagine one of the reasons that people cling to their hate and prejudice so stubbornly is that they sense that once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with their own pain. And in some way, we can project it on somebody who looks different, on those people, the enemy du jour, who might be the Muslims in somebody's mind, or the communist, or whoever, because we haven't been able to actually face whether it's the emptiness or the incompleteness of our own life. And so it becomes enacted, as you say, in the society.
And if I may, there's where I think reading through the Red Book, and I hope it's such a work of art, I hope that the art doesn't obscure the message, because to read through that is quite an impressive journey. And I had just a little thought on that, if I may. And since I'm getting very old,
you're not that old. I mean, you're sparkling.
But having gone through the text of the Red Book, I now can understand how in Jung's experience that he would have proclaimed on a number of times that God had fallen out of heaven and into the psyche of man. The subterranean creative fantasy, which Jung treated as an authentic reality within his own psyche, moved him beyond the established principles of conventional biblical interpretation to a synthesis with the collective unconscious. And that connected him to his individual lifeline. And I think it was from that he put such emphasis on the individuation process. And through this underworld confrontation, Jung formed a personal relationship to his own soul and to the God within. And when I read that, I was so struck that within the astrological time frame, Jung's experience heralds the evolutionary movement into the age of Aquarius, the age of the individual water carrier, where the individual is challenged to carry the waters of life. And there's where I think with our frantic extroversion, that is a task that has been tried to be avoided.
So when you say the individual or individuation, you talk about, in a way, becoming both connected with your deepest values and the deepest part of yourself, and somehow being authentic or true to that? Is that what you mean?
Authentic and true, and also responsible. So when it comes to having to claim our own darkness, the real value would be then one has a chance one has a choice to see how that will be expressed. And without it, if the shadow has you, instead of you having the shadow, you don't have a choice.
So the descent that Jung took, that you talk about, and this willingness to face one's shadow, he says at one point, I learned to take seriously the figures of the forest and the sky and every unknown wanderer. I looked inside and I developed a relationship to all those figures, the dragon that you see here, which we'll talk about, and others. Now, you may hear this and think, okay, this was Jung's journey, and he had a fantastical imagination, and maybe he should have worked for Industrial Light and Magic and helped, with modern Hollywood movies. But it's not that way. The question which you raise in a different language is not the future of humanity, but the presence of eternity. That there is a capacity to connect to something that's not of the day world, as Jung said, or the spirit of the times, but a spirit that is timeless within us. A couple of examples to give. My good friend Malidoma Somé, who's a West African medicine man, also a professor at the University of Michigan, 2 Ph.D.s from the Sorbonne and Brandeis, he said when he finished his initiation and was sent by his elders to America, he could hardly stand it because his psychic vision was open. And he said, your streets are full of the ungrieved dead. I could see them, the ones who died in the back wards of mental hospitals, the homeless people who died, the ones who are untended in your ghettos, the one who died in your wars. And in our culture, we grieve everyone who's lost, and that honors and respects their life. But you have a culture that shunts them aside and moves away, and so you live a half a life. When I've worked with gang kids in these retreats, people coming out of the gangs in Watts, East Los Angeles, Oakland, Chicago, they'll come in, and I work with the poet Luis Rodriguez, a wonderful Los Angeles poet, and Michael Mead and so forth, and we'll talk about meditation or poetry, and they're back with their hats kind of over their heads like poetry, man, It's like Inner Journey, come on, give me something real. And then we'll say, all right, we set up an altar, just a simple table like this, and say, go outside and find a stone for every young person you know who has died, who has been killed. And some of them will come back with their hands full of stones. No young person should know that many dead people. And we say, and put the stones on the altar and simply say their name. And all of a sudden, from a conversation about poetry and meditation, yeah, show me, why should I be interested? The room becomes truly alive, because what matters to them in this very simple ritual, they begin the descent to face the loss, the grief, all the feelings they have, and say, how do I come to terms with this life? Luis Rodriguez.
And
ahead.
if I might say, I think part of the real value of getting related to that darkness is that one can find meaning in the suffering.
Yes.
And without that, that meaningless suffering it's deadly.
Then you're just bearing it like a oxen or something, rather than finding that there's
But you bury your life with it.
some grace that can come through. And my teacher, when I entered the monastery like you when I read your biography and saw the death of your mother and the oppression of your father and almost dying. I went into the Buddhist monastery rather than medical school. It was kind of one way or the other. They're both tough, right? But anyway, because I heard Buddhist teachings about suffering. Buddha's very straightforward about this, that life entails suffering, and there are ways to work with it, ways to transform it. And in the violence and the abusiveness in my family, my father was a really unpredictable, violent man who was violent to us as children, but he really beat and battered my mother. And I don't know whether it's harder to witness or to have it happen to you. And I said, okay, somebody here, my teacher said there are two kinds of suffering. The kind you run away from that follows you everywhere, or the kind that you're willing to turn and face.
And do you think that you would ever gone so deeply in your search if you hadn't had that suffering?
No. So it
I
became,
doubt it.
in a way, it became a seed, a necessity.
It becomes a necessity.
But if I were to turn to you and say, how many of you have had some deep loss or deep suffering? You don't have to raise your hands if you really pay attention and listen.
Because we've all had it.
We have. And so my friend Luis Rodriguez, he'll stand up in front of these young guys and say, my name's not Rodriguez. It's a sigh of climbing feet, a slave master's religion, the lather of gold lust. My real name's the ash of memory of burned trees, the 3-year-old wandering in the plain of the Sand Creek massacre. I'm Geronimo's yell into the canyons of the old ones. Call me Rodriguez, and my name scorches the walls of 1,000 years of loss. It's the crawling of life, the watery of breath between ledges. Call me Rodriguez. It's the brew from fermented heartaches. Don't call me Rodriguez unless you mean peon and sod carrier, unless you mean slayer of truth and deep sixer of hopes, unless you mean forget and then die. For my name is the same as the black-hooded 9mm wielding child in all our alleys. I am death row monk, the 8-year-old gum seller in city bars and taco shops. I'm unlicensed, uninsured, unregulated, and unforgiven, and therefore I'm free and hungry. Call me Rodriguez and know who I really am. And he'll stand up and read a poem to these young men like a Mayan sacrifice, and they go, okay, I'm ready to write my own poem. Okay, I'm ready to talk to you because you're talking a language that speaks to the depth of the suffering that I carry inside and to the suffering of the society that hasn't been given voice to.
And I think our culture has split, which I think partly was what I was trying to connect with, was to heal the split between spirit and nature. And if we think of the spirit of nature, nature is not always kind.
Say more. We know it's true, but elaborate if you would, please.
Well, if I think back on my own life, being born in a little town in northern Wisconsin, one street, it was the death of my mother that forced us out of that town. And I went back a few years ago, and most of the people had never left. And I thought, if without having that loss, I could still be stuck.
So the wound also becomes the gift. I mean,
And I think it's part of the symbolism of the cross.
in what way? Because Jung paints all these crosses as you did. You painted-
As I did. But if one has to hold the opposites of the light and the dark, or the material and the spiritual,
or the loss and the suffering
and the loss
and the redemption that
and
somehow comes out of it.
and the redemption. But it's not a comfortable place to hang.
Get that. But you've been hanging there for 60, you started this almost 60 years ago.
And I started it when I thought that I was going to Zurich to get ready to die. And I'm at 93, and if I'd never been healthier in my life. So figure.
There's something about facing the shadow. That's. So, if I may, Katie, let me take 15 minutes or so to reflect a little about the Red Book and the journey that it speaks to, and then you have some slides, and we'll go from there.
Jack has assured me that he is the extrovert.
So I promised I'd keep track of time a little
So he can do all he
bit.
wants, and I'll sit here very comfortably.
I want to ask before I go anything further, because tonight isn't rehearsed, and it's not really just a presentation about the Red Book. It's really a series of questions, or maybe, from what you're saying, challenges to you and to us as culture and as individual in these times. What is our refuge? And what are we willing to look at and work with and face so that we can indeed become authentic, compassionate, wise in hard times and in dark times in the world?
And you know, Jung, when you speak of the Red Book, there were a couple of places that he really emphasized that the struggle that he was going through was his journey.
Yes, he emphasizes that so much so you can't imitate it.
So you can't imitate it. And with that idea of individuation is that the challenge would be for each and every individual that would have their own unique journey.
As we'll see
Starting from their unique challenge to the journey they'd have in life.
the wounds that you carry, or the stones that you would place. I mean, you can reflect what stones would you place on that altar, because you all have stones to place. So there are two things I want to talk about. The first is a little bit of the parallels and differences with Buddhist practice, and then the other is about initiation. And the parallels, if you read the Red Book, it is really the equivalent of Jung's, in the Buddhist mythology, the Buddha practiced and eventually sat under the Bodhi tree and had his enlightenment experiences, his enlightenment experience where he faced the demons and came to a kind of inner liberation. And the Red Book is the journal of those 3 years of Jung's life where he sat under his tree or sat playing in the sand and faced those same kind of demons and had to come to a resolution of the opposites of evil and good, of individuality and society, of joy and sorrow, and come to his own sense of liberation. And in that sense, as the Buddha left home because of the question of suffering, Jung entered this journey with great loss, with World War I happening, tremendous bloodshed in the world all around him, and what he called this ancient question, which was the same word the Buddha used. He said, I'm looking for this ancient path that others before me have taken. And it was the path of a descent. And for Jung, it was going into hell and facing the various demons, having a dialogue with the devil and dialogue with all these figures. And the Buddha the same. Under the tree of enlightenment, he faced Mara. And Mara came in the form of temptation and doubt and the armies of aggression and the words that said, "You will never do this. Who do you think you are?" And you can see the parallels in that inner journey. And in that confrontation with these forces, both the Buddha and Jung learned that it was necessary to actually engage them. There are all these dialogues where the Buddha is talking to Mara, and Jung is in there, and some god or demon or whatever comes and says something, and Jung says, "No, I don't believe you. Prove it. Show me." And they have this whole argument, as the Buddha does with Mara, which is to say that some authentic part in us needs to have a relationship with these timeless forces and not just give over to them in some fundamental way. And the lesson that Jung learned, which is in tantric understanding of Buddhism, is that you don't get rid of and slay the demons, because Mara comes back 40 times after the Buddha was enlightened. They continue their conversation. Don't think Mara's going away, guys. Mara comes and says, "You know, you're being lazy. You're already enlightened and now you're lazy." And the Buddha says, "You know, who are you talking to?" So you have to have this conversation. The lesson is that you don't slay the demons and the dragons, but you develop a wise relationship to these forces, which are the primary forces of life itself.
And may I say,
please,
that with each relationship that you consciously relate to and bring into your life, your ego is expanded. You have a broader base on which to live.
But it's not an easy relationship. In one of these images, Jung has to, it's like the fairy tale of licking the worst of the wounds, or eat the liver in this dead child. It's really a confrontation with the things that you fear the most in your life, and as in Buddhist practice, a confrontation with death and a dialogue with death, in order to find that which is timeless, or which Jung spoke of as the inner gold and the Buddhists speak of as inner nobility. In the collective unconscious, or Buddhism speaks of the storehouse conscious, to find the capacity to navigate and still remain in some way awake and compassionate and wise. Now there's some differences, because in the Buddhist, Jung kind of did it on his own because he needed to. In the Buddhist tradition, there are all these systematic practices and trainings, 1,000 of them, of mindfulness and loving kindness and compassion and working with demons and images, so that there's a tradition that can take you. It's not theistic in the way that Jung's journey was. And it also shows certain other realms of samadhi and vision and lights and jhanas, and there's whole maps of potential states of consciousness and so forth, often done in relation to a teacher rather than on your own, although now you would do it in relation to an analyst. But the fundamental trajectory of the journey is really one of initiation. And initiation means that either deliberate or accidental, in your life at some point, you will find a calling that says you can't just live the outer life that you've been given. You have to find some more authentic way to live, or you're not fulfilling this incarnation, this life purpose on earth. And sometimes it's what in Greek is called a katabas, a blow, like your mother's death, or a cancer diagnosis, or the loss of all your money, or the death of a child, or something that happens like that to you, in which all of a sudden everything that you thought yourself to be is turned upside down. Or sometimes it's deliberate, where you go sit outside the gates of the monastery for 3 days in the snow in Zen, until they say, this person really wants to know about life and death, let them in. But it doesn't have to be, that's sort of the masculine journey. It might be a woman, as my wife was in giving birth to our daughter, Caroline, in labor for 3 days and 3 nights. And there was a long labor, because Caroline's head wasn't engaged right. And those 3 days and nights were part of the initiation into becoming a mother and giving birth in another way to the world. And through initiation, and our culture has forgotten it, so young people are trying to initiate themselves. Instead of killing a lion, they're killing other people on the streets, because we don't know how to have elders supervise or be part of the initiation of the young, whether it is through active imagination, through the painting that you did, through my training in the monastery, through the Maasai initiation of going out and, killing the lion, through a year of silence that the Basques use to initiate my friend who's a Basque shaman, at age 16 spent a year in silence in the woods as part of her initiation. Through the peyote ceremonies of the Huichol Indians, through sand play therapy, and we'll see some images for this. There is some deliberate way in which you look inside and say, what do I know? What do I really value? What matters the most in this life that I have to live no matter what everybody else says? And in it, you have to face loss. You have to face what Jung did, the sufferings and the difficulties, and he called it the way of not knowing. My teacher called it uncertainty. He said, it's really, you have to follow like Braille. You can't know where you're going, but you have to trust in what starts to reveal itself in the dark. Somerset Maugham said there are 3 rules for writing the great American novel. Unfortunately, no one knows what they are, right? And there's some way in which to take this inner journey requires a willingness to be present, which is the meditation training of presence, of sacred presence, to be willing to be present for your life and for your inner life. And in that quality of mindful presence, to begin to say, all right, here I am. What is life asking of me? What are the deep questions? What matters to you? What do you want to leave? And for Jung, it was no part left out. The Zen people say the same thing. The Zen master says, I knew myself completely, no part left out. And so Jung has to relate to the kitsch, pulp fiction kind of figures in there, and to the stupid lout and the arrogant one. He sees his own narcissism and arrogance, and he's disgusted with himself. And the part that's scorned, and the daughter that's locked up in the tower, and the dragons, and the ancestors, because you're not here alone. You're here with the streets full of the ungrieved dead, and your grandparents' wishes for you, and your great-parents' parents. You are living out through your parents in unconscious ways. And he let himself look into this, both for his own sake, but also as a bodhisattva. He says at one point, he said, it's not for myself alone, but for the sake of all the patients that I see. And we see, as Zen Master Thich Nhat Hanh said, when the crowded Vietnamese refugee boats met with storms or pirates, if everyone panicked, all would be lost. But if even one person on the boat remained calm and centered, it was enough. It showed the way for everyone to survive.
Because it provides a baffle for the panic that gets us caught in a kind of a mob affect.
It provides a baffle from the panic.
I
It shows as if that person, or you maybe as an analyst, carries some state of trust and being, that someone who comes to you in the middle of a terrible divorce, or the feeling that I'm doing the wrong work in my life, or the sense that my children have just left home and I don't know what to do, and you carry a kind of trust for them when they come to see you.
But that you don't get caught by it.
Do you ever get caught?
There's always the temptation because it's so powerful.
Yes. Yeah.
But when I think of Jung's having to take a stand for what is really his own, I think very often it's so difficult for us to discriminate what is our own against what the collective expects us to be.
And yet that's the key, isn't it? To know, to have the discrimination, to know not just what that kind of you're supposed to be and all those voices in your head that telling you who you're supposed to be, to distinguish that from what's genuine in yourself?
To distinguish that and know what your own position is, not what you should be, but to have to be really interconnected enough to know what you could be. It's it that I think that is it. I think if we did nothing more than to question our shoulds and make it really responsible to what we could be, because there's such a pressure for us to think that we should be perfect or we should be all things, and we're human, limited human beings. And I think as long as we are being driven by what we could be, we very often miss the point. If we're driven by what we should be, we very often miss the point of what we could be, or to even contribute what we could.
Which is our most authentic gift as
Which
well.
is our most authentic gift.
Yeah. To our children, to our art, to the world, to whatever it is.
To the world, and to do it in a humane way. You know, I don't think it's narcissism, because we still are collective beings, and that's part of who we are.
Florida Scott Maxwell, the author, writes, "No matter how old a mother is, she looks at her middle-aged children for signs of improvement," right? and we internalize that. I mean, that's kind of a humorous way to say it, but we have all this stuff, or here's another way, slightly more painful, from Jules Feiffer in 4 little cartoons, where he says, I inherited my father's way of speaking, and my father's style of movement, and my father's way of thinking about things, my father's attitudes, and my mother's contempt for my father, right? And so there's what I read in yours, and then maybe we'll go on to these slides, what I read in your work, and I see, is both stepping out of the thrall of the pressure of the oppression of, for you, it was of patriarchy, of parental and father expectations, of the society expectations of a woman of your day to be in the kitchen, Betty Crocker, baking things or whatever apparently you didn't, just wouldn't listen to the program.
That's right.
You know, and then the social pressures of what it meant to be a good person, and pretend that we weren't going to war all the time, or pretend that there wasn't racism, or pretend that there wasn't the kind of violence, to actually be willing to turn and say, no, this is what I see, and this is what I have to contribute to it. Shall we look at some of the images?
I was particularly impressed with this image. And as I looked at it and really looked beyond the star, is the figure of the man with his arms upraised there on the right, where there was the human being. I'm not quite sure at what point it was that this painting was done. I'm not really that aware.
You know,
Does it?
I don't know where it is in the cycle, but when you enter the Buddhist temples, very often there are either guardian demons or dragons at the gates. And the only way you can enter the temple is to be willing to face your own demons and dragons, to go through the dragons in some way.
And certainly the dragon comes from where the man has his hand raised here, up and around, and really just to the left of the center of the...
Well, you painted demons and dragons as well in this.
Oh, I saw that, for me, that terrible split between spirit and nature, the patriarchal spirit of how repressed the nature was, and the wisdom of nature with the serpent, and nature being so much the feminine, and without the connection to that, and I think, given the times and the situations, that I was just forced out, not to relate to life, but to conquer life, because those were very, very difficult times. And so really, this book, the whole message of this book, I think, was try to bring the feminine spirit along with the feminine values. And I don't think of women necessarily or biological as feminine, but the whole feminine values of the unconscious, of nature, of our body, of all of those things that were so left out of the patriarchal value system. And I found it devastating. So that the serpent comes as that instinctual wisdom and that instinctual connection to that deep layer of nature and to the feminine that had to be repressed so that consciousness could be developed by the patriarchal emergence in the patriarchal management.
So the serpent is both the guardian and a connection to the feminine, to the instinctual, to the earth, to connectedness, and also then the guardian of the rainforests and the oceans and the things that say you cannot continue to rape the earth, you cannot continue, that the serpent in some way is the instinctual of the earth speaking to us in ways that we must listen to.
And in a funny way, it seemed that, well, it was very interesting with that illness, and I really thought that it would be life-taking. And my husband was a doctor, and medicine couldn't put their finger on what it was. And I finally had a dream. And the dream was that the reason for this illness is the threshold is so low, so that the unconscious was washing in. And I think that kind of like Jung, having to be a kind of individual thrust into this coming Aquarian age, or this age of movement into a whole new value system where the individual would have to carry it. I just gave up all looking for any medical solution and went to Zurich thinking, I have to find the meaning of my life before I die. And that started me on this tremendously rich search that just loosened up the energy and found a direction for it. But in that time, those were very different times. I was speaking to a friend on the way up, and I said, well, we didn't talk about inner experiences when I started this in the late 40s, early 50s. You didn't mention if you saw a Jungian analyst. Never. And she said, why? Why about that? In the 60s, why? Was it like sex that you wouldn't talk about sex? And I said, no, it doesn't have anything to do with sex. But this would be, you would be considered just too weird.
Yeah. Well, you are, obviously, you know. And fortunately, you're with your people,
like it.
you know. And I'm honored.
Now I like it.
So could we have the next image, too?
And this was the world egg, if I remember, that he was talking about. But there, too, he has all these instinctual animal figures here in the bottom.
So this is really, again, as a mandala, this is more the completion of wholeness that comes when the instinctual and the luminous somehow are connected with that. It's like a tree of life in the middle.
But isn't it wonderful that he brings the world, that there in the center by the roots of the tree and the stump of the tree, that he has the natural world.
The forests and the fields, yeah.
Beautiful.
And then slide 3.
Now this is more like your mandala, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah. This is a mandala, and it has figures on each of the 4 quarters that represent the energies that Jung had to come to terms with in himself, both figures of wisdom, as you can see on the top, carriers of certain energies, and the mandalas are really diagrams of the forces of the inner world and their relationship to one another. Sometimes they're stylized with figures, and sometimes, as you'll see if we can see slide 4, they're really a symbol of the energy of the harmony of inner life without the actual figures. And this was one of the last mandalas that's the last one in the Red Book that Jung drew, very much connected to what he learned about the Chinese alchemical tradition from Wilhelm.
And this brings order into the chaos then that he had gone through.
And if you would show us slide 9.
Whoops.
No, slide 9. Let's see if we can do this. This is the Tibetan equivalent, if you will, of finding order. And each of those 4 directions, as in Jung's mandala, are directions of various states of consciousness. One for compassion, one for discriminating wisdom, one for the instinctual world, each represented by different Buddhas or different primordial energies. So again, it is the ordering of the energies of life out of chaos.
So would your different Buddhas be like the different archetypes?
The different Buddhas do represent different archetypes. The archetype of compassion, or the archetype of Manjusri, the Buddha who carries the sword of discriminating wisdom and is unafraid to enter difficulty and cut through illusion. Exactly.
I think that it speaks well for Jung that he was able to walk around and include so many of these different established religious approaches.
And that he saw with this very deep vision the underlying connection that an image
That's
in
right.
ancient Sumeria or an image in the Buddhist tantric literature or the Mayan codices showed some of the same fundamental forces of the psyche.
Which supports
worldwide,
his
which is-
collective
Yes.
unconscious.
Yeah. So then could we have Katie's slides, next 6, please?
So this was an attempt to try to find some feminine figure, I guess, she stands on the moon, and she just wanted to be painted. And I'm not an artist, but I have to say that the unconscious wanted these images painted.
She wanted to be seen and painted and
She wanted to
respected,
be seen.
it sounds like. There's
And-
some way she wanted your attention, and as Jung
That's
said,
right.
I have to take this seriously. I can't just say this is a fantasy. This is life coming through you. Is that right?
That's right.
It wasn't like, oh, I think of a woman. It's more
No,
like
no.
you're possessed by this. Is that?
That's right. And to try to find out what it is to be a woman.
Which is a little different than Jung's journey. If we look at Katie's blue book and Jung's red book, they are both amazing journeys of images and inner life, but this is much more a feminine journey.
This is a feminine search, but a search for the center. But instead of the old wise man or Philemon, mine would be the great mother. Would be a feminine.
The carrier of wisdom. So let's see slide 8, please.
And I think to get any sense for the woman's, to get any sense of herself, she has to sacrifice that patriarchal should. And that was a tremendous challenge for me because I knew how it should be. And I suffered, and the people around me suffered terribly. And so this, to be sacrificed, but in several of the other pictures, I think those eyes and that strange, isn't really a cat-like figure. But this was a time that would have been carried, too, by the container of this instinctual Hopi bowl. And we were fortunate enough to have been very close friends to the Hopis from the early 60s on, which connected us to those very earthy rituals, religious rituals that were very meaningful in my life.
And ritual is an ancient language. When those young men put a stone on the altar, it was something that could have gone back 10,000 years, one candle and a stone, and all of a sudden people understand this is a sacred activity that comes out of the earth, as the Hopi know.
And it was a collective, when they would have those dances, that was a collective where those archetypal kachinas, which were representing the archetypes, were interacting in the plaza below, and that really spoke to my soul.
So moving. And it's a little bit of the difference between the introverted path of analysis with one other person and the collective meditation of a Buddhist monastery or the Hopis. I mean, just to be flip for a moment, my friend Annie Lamott likes to say, my mind is like a bad neighborhood. I try not to go there alone, right? And so people come and meditate together. But there's something for the Hopis about raising up the figure of the mud one, or the figure of these powerful figures, and having them held in the plaza and having them held collectively so that that there's a community container to hold these forces.
And it had that numinous force, but it had it in the archetypal form.
Which meant then that it was workable rather than personally overwhelming.
That's right.
It wasn't just your own personal loss or
No.
aggression, but
That-
you were seeing the universal
That's
element
right.
of aggression. So if we could see slide 8, which gives some sense. Oh, we have slide 8. Wait a second. The next one, slide 5.
And there's the woman now, more within her own cross, with the different figures that play around it, with the serpent in the bowl and the elephant, which is such a great mother figure in a way. And, you know, we can't really be expressive as women without the help of that masculine side. So he's kind of trying to get free and
Trying to help as best he can, given
As
his
best he
masculine
can, you know.
limitations, right?
but it's kind of nice to have him on a cross of his own.
Right. Cross of his own, that's right.
And of course, the eagle that brings the fire.
The eagle that brings the fire, and the fire is the fire of
Gosh, passion, I guess.
passion,
Light,
illumination.
you know, passion of spirit.
And vision in some way, because the eagle can also see
That's
in
right.
that vast way. But they're all, it looks like they're all in service to, if not
They are.
supplication to,
They
they're
are.
actually in service of the,
And
of the feminine.
she is rooted on a tree. If one can see that there are roots on the tree. But the tree now has leaves. And I think in my first paintings, the branches were so bare.
And that, if you took nothing else away tonight, to hear that sentence, in my first paintings, the branches were so bare. And then you think, what is barren, whether it's in your own life or in your family or community or where you live, and what is it that would bring the nectar of understanding, of love, of grace, of transformation?
Or something to your soul.
Something to your soul. And Jung says, not power nor contempt nor love, but give humanity dignity and trust that life will find a better way. And there's some way in his work that he offers a respect, as if a bow in the temple of dignity to the demons and to the beings that come, and you're offering respect to in this way.
You know, the real value, I think, of having a painting like this, and they ended up pretty big, and I'd hang them on my wall, and then I could meditate on it. And whatever it was that had demanded to be painted on that, it gave a chance for that to be integrated.
Beautiful. So would you meditate over a series of days and weeks
Oh,
after you painted?
that would be on my wall for a long time. So my bedroom was a very weird place to get into.
Kinky, Katie, I can see it, yeah. But hey, it's Los Angeles, whatever, you know. Well, you were wedding the inner and the outer. I mean, you were willing to
Yes, really.
to take that journey. So could we see slide 7?
Whoop.
That's 8, 7.
We skipped around a bit here.
They'll get it. 7 is waiting in the unseen to be born in a moment. This is a good slide, too. This is the one that you all need, actually, for your own.
Whoops.
No, that's still 8. The one before it.
There. And that was one of the later ones, to where the great mother, the archetypal mother, which really filled that gaping hole of growing up in just a masculine world without the help of, a physical mother. And that she carries the cross in her head. but it's more an equilateral cross. So I think it's not so far away from the earth where you get the horizontal. And also the creative force, the child.
The creative force, which is the child of the spirit somehow,
The
that's
child
born
of
with
the
every
spirit.
single child, that creative force.
And so that this was a feeling really of rebirth, in that it had the growing wheats or grasses, and it is not a barren world.
It is not a barren world. Yeah, you are held.
So each one has their own inner calling and own inner images, I think.
Yes. And let me show then another way to get images, and then we'll do a meditation so that you can work with your own, because it's one thing to see the remarkable
else's.
images of Katie or of Jung, but that was Jung's thing, right? So could we see, go ahead.
And well, we mentioned that before, that Jung says that was his experience.
Yes. Yeah. So could we see slide number 10? This is one of the most famous of Buddhist mandalas, and it's really a psychological diagram of the realms of existence. In the mouth of Lord Yama, who is the god of birth and death, and the wheel of incarnation, there is, in the upper part, the heaven realm, and in the very lowest part, the hell realm. And if you read in the Red Book, Jung had to, as the Buddha did, had to go into the hell realm and have a dialogue with Mara or Satan or the devil and understand evil in some direct way. There's the animal instinctual realm on the left, lower left side. And there's a realm on the right-hand side that you will recognize if you've ever been to Las Vegas. It's called the realm of the hungry ghosts. It's the street. It's the ungrieved dead. It's the unfinished spirits of our ancestors that live through us when we don't listen, which Jung also had to traverse through.
He did.
And then above, there's the realm of on the right-hand side, there's the realm of the jealous gods, and it's really the realm of power. And Jung found in his journey that he saw his own ambition and narcissism and power, and it was one of the great blocks to being able to really be an authentic human being, to live what Oscar Wilde called the tainted glory of humanity, not to be some great, imaginary person, but rather to have a humility and at the same time also the mystery of being alive. And on the upper left is the human realm with its 10,000 joys and sorrows, and again the top is the heaven realm. And then all the pictures around it show the ways of traveling from one realm to another and how we get caught in these realms and how we can free ourselves.
And interesting that at the very center, they have a serpent.
At the very center is a serpent, a rooster, and a pig, which represent the instinctual forces that need to be come to terms with and transformed in some way, or you are lost in endless cycling unless you can come to terms with the greed and the hatred and the fear and transform them. So another way, if we could have slide 10, some people say, well, it's nice that Jung and Katie painted these amazing paintings, but I can't paint. When I was in 3rd grade, I drew an elephant, and the teacher said, what is that? And I never drew another picture again. So another form of Jungian work is sand play therapy, which you have a little sandbox you can see at the bottom, and 5,000 figures of trees and animals and cars and houses and everything imaginable. And then if we could see slide 12, you are invited to make a scene in the sand, and all the forces that are in you, it's like dreaming out loud. You don't think about it. It just comes out of you.
It's a powerful tool.
It's a wonderful practice, and you can find that through the Jung Institute and the sand play Therapy Society. Slide 13. Sometimes it's with figures, and sometimes you talked about the Hopis. Sometimes it comes in a way that speaks eloquently without a single figure, like those mandalas that Jung did that didn't have a figure on them, but showed the order of earth, air, fire, and water of humanity. If we could see slide 14. Through all the struggles toward the end of the process of sand play therapy, like the end of your paintings, there starts to come forms of resolution. And you can see this depiction in the psyche of this person as they, maybe after 20 or 30 or 40 sand plays and after a number of years of work, as they started to find the place where they could sit in the seat in the middle of all the forces of joy and sorrow, of gain and loss, of praise and blame, and accept them as their full humanity with the great heart of compassion. You see the compassion figure in the center. Could we see the last slide, 15, which is another tray from someone, and you see in the center that beautiful jewel in the cave. And Jung writes, "Yesterday I had this marvelous dream, one bluish diamond like a star high in heaven, reflected in a round, quiet pool, heaven above, heaven below. The imago Dei in the darkness of earth. This is myself." And this is not someone who read Jung, but this is someone like you, Katie, who took the journey because they had to, not because it was a good idea, but because something in us calls for this, and use this vehicle, like your painting, to find that which gave them courage and fearlessness and timelessness in all the changes of the world.
Eleanor Bertine, who was an early analyst in New York, at Jung's memorial service, gave this message. In the memorial, she stated, "As a roadmap to individuation, Jung has provided the most important thing, a way of meaning in the non-personal psyche itself. This way is through a symbolic interpretation of spontaneous psychological products, whether they occur as personal dreams and fantasies or as collective ideas, myths, and beliefs. Thus, he has given us back as symbols what science took away as dogma."
Beautiful. And symbols are the language of the psyche, of dreams. They're before
That's right.
words. They're the carriers of meaning for us, and in every culture, on the temples and carved in the walls and made as part of their baskets. The symbols teach us and carry understanding. So what I'd like to do now is have you do a meditation that allows you to have some part of your own inner journey. Do you want to stand for 30 seconds and stretch your body? Because this is an embodied process as well, and we tend to kind of see it as exterior and theatrical, and it's not. You're actually about to enter a part of your own journey, because otherwise you won't get your money's worth tonight. And feel how your body wants to stretch from the inside. It knows how to move. Maybe close your eyes and see if it wants to bend or twist or breathe, or allow it to begin to open from an inner attention, the mindfulness of body, the mindfulness of feelings, the mindfulness of what's present. And then let yourself sit back down. And this will be maybe 7, 8 minutes of meditation, 10 minutes at most, and then a little time to talk about it. And in part, it will be a visualization. And I need to say this, that people sometimes, like they think I can't draw, they also think I can't visualize. And some people visualize more easily than others, but it's not very complicated. If I ask you, picture an elephant, you can sort of imagine its trunk and its little tail and the 4 big pillars of its legs, its gray color. Or if I ask you, remember what you had for dinner tonight and what was on your plate when it was served, you can picture in your mind's eye what was there on your plate, and then what was left when you finished your dinner, what your plate looked like. You know, it's there to be seen, and it's that simple. It's a kind of inner attention in the mind's eye that just knows. So use what you can from this to be present and take what comes. Now, in the Red Book, Jung enters a cave in several places in the Red Book where he describes, and even before as a child, going this dream of a stone-like hole and descending these stairs into a chamber, and there's this whole inner temple under the field, or within the Red Book itself, there's a descent that he takes plunge down into the dark cave of the depths, and he meets all these figures. So this will be our practice now. Let your eyes close gently. And first, come just here into the reality of the present. Take a few deep cleansing breaths to help you be present where you are. The sign in Las Vegas, the casino, says you must be present to win. It's true in Las Vegas, and it's the start of meditation. And with these breaths, sense your body seated here halfway between heaven and earth in this human form. You are the Buddha seated under your own tree of awakening. The breath, body, the sense of presence. And while we could explore present time, what feelings and images, thoughts are with you, let us go on this guided meditation to uncover another dimension of your own understanding. Imagine that you are, picture, visualize, imagine, think of that you're walking through a beautiful forest or woods, one you may have seen or seen in a picture. And there you are walking through these beautiful woods that you remember or have seen, this beautiful forest. And all of a sudden, you come to the entrance to a cave, a big cave entrance. And you find yourself drawn to this cave entrance, quite large enough for you to walk into. And by the entrance to the cave is a torch or a lantern or a flashlight that you can pick up to help you navigate in this cave. And don't enter it quite yet, but when you enter this cave, you will find yourself exploring 3 of the first rooms of this underground cavern. So having walked through the forest, seeing the entrance to the cave, now lift the torch or the lamp or the flashlight and walk into the cave and feel the darkness and the energy of the cave, this underground that you enter. And as you enter the cave and walk slowly, the first chamber that you will come to, the first room on the right, not quite yet, when you enter the room, not yet, there will be for you a guide, a figure, a being, known or unknown, human or animal or spirit, some figure who will help guide you into the underworld of this cave. So let yourself enter the first room and be surprised. Let yourself see or think of or imagine, picture any way you can, someone, some being, some spirit is waiting for you, and you can see, you can know. and they greet you. And you feel their presence, their energy, their essence, for they will be a guide the way Virgil is a guide for Dante. They will be a guide for you. And you can speak with them. If you wish to ask their name, you can do so. Greet them. Or just pay your respects. And in any way, whatever comes most quickly or easily, whatever floods into or is imagined or sensed or seen or known, greet this guide or this being, and they will lead you now to the second chamber of the cave. Deeper in the cave, they say, "Come with me," and they beckon to you. And you follow them more deeply into the cavern. And before you go into the second room, let me tell you what you will find there and that they will show you to. The second room is a treasure room. And when you enter this room, there will be a chest or a box or something waiting for you that is a clear symbol of what you need at this point in your life to take this inner journey or to continue this inner journey. And so let yourself be guided by this figure into the treasure room, and there's an amazing magic chest or box, and there waiting as you open the lid, or the guide opens the lid and pulls out for you this clear symbol of what you need to carry you on this journey. See it, picture it, imagine it, know it, trust it. And if the symbol isn't so clear, hold it up in your hands to the light of the torch or the flashlight. Or if you wish to understand it further, now this inner guide leans over to you as you hold this gift, this symbol, this treasure, and whispers into your ear a few words of advice of what this is or what you must do with it. Listen, hear, imagine, sense any way you can what words of advice they give to you. And hearing these words, and now taking this gift, this clear symbol of what you need that will carry you on this journey, your guide will now take you to the third room of this cave, the third part of this entrance to your journey. And before you enter this third room, what you will find, I will tell you when you enter, is a clear symbol, a thing, a figure, a being, of what is unseen that calls to you from the depths, what it is time for you to come to terms with in your life, what you must face or understand to fulfill your destiny, to fulfill your life purpose. It might be a figure, it might be a being, it might be a thing. It's a clear symbol of what has been unconscious and unseen that requires you to know. And so the guide takes you with your torch lit into this room of that which has been waiting for you for a long time, which will take you into the depths and carry you in your journey, what you must come to terms with. And enter this room and let yourself see or know, picture, imagine, sense any way you can. Entering, meeting your guide, taking the treasure, the symbol of how to begin your journey, and now seeing that which is unseen, which has been neglected, which calls from the depths to you. You may ask your guide a question. Let yourself imagine, picture, sense any way you can, and they will answer you. And having heard what they say, now offer your respects to your guide and know that they will be waiting for you to guide you, to support you as you continue your journey. Know that there is greater depth to this cave, that this is the entry into a whole dimension of knowing, of a vast journey for you. And your guide will accompany you back to the entry of the cave and leave you back again in the green woods and forest to carry your treasure, the wisdom they've offered you, and the understanding, the symbol of what is calling for you, what unfinished, what from the depths needs your attention, so that you can fulfill your life and your destiny. And when you are ready, back in these beautiful woods, feel your body seated here, halfway between heaven and earth, this human form, and let your eyes open again and come back. Now, before we go any further, maybe I will ask a couple of questions. Is there anyone who feels comfortable naming either a symbol of something you got as a treasure that you would like to say, just to have a few images in the room? Raise your hand. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, please wait for the microphone because we're recording.
Okay, so the microphone down here in the third row, there's a hand up. We'll just take a few of these.
Okay.
I saw, I want to say a scimitar or a sickle. So it was the crescent moon on a long handle.
Yes.
It was very clear to me that what I had to cut through and eliminate and just cut the swath
Yes.
to the
Yes.
center.
So this is a really important image for you, and these are like dream images. You want to take this and carry it and reflect on it. You might actually want to go out and buy yourself a scimitar. I'm serious. You know, I won't talk about the people you live with, but you need to go buy that thing. It is the sword of the Bodhisattva Manjusri that cuts through illusion, and you can feel what it's beginning to ask of you. So this symbol speaks to a whole journey for yourself. Thank you. Another person or two. Anyone? Yes, here in the front. We'll just take a couple of examples.
My grandfather's diamond.
Your grandfather's diamond?
Mm-hmm.
Can you say any more about that?
He gave it to me when I was 16, and I have it hidden away in my safety deposit box.
He gave it to you when you were 16 and you have it in a
Hidden
safe
away in a
deposit
safety
box.
deposit box.
And there's some inheritance from your grandfather. I mean, this is a symbol again, your grandfather's diamond. Your grandfather is speaking to you through this diamond and asking something of you that is powerful and luminous and of some great necessity. It's time to get it out of the safe deposit box. Maybe one more up here again in front. We'll just do the front ones because they're easy and we don't have so much time.
Mercury.
Mercury?
Yeah, liquid.
So you got a little, your treasure to start with was and can you say something about the mercury, what that feels or senses, what makes the beginning of what makes your understanding?
Well, the guide could touch it, but because it's poison, it was given to me in a container.
The guide could touch it, but because it was poison, it was given to me in a container. So how to relate to that which is poison, but at the same time luminous, that the spirit can touch. And Mercury, of course, if you look mythologically, Mercury is the god Hermes, if you will, who's the mediator between heaven and earth and dialogues between Zeus and the gods and the humans. Mercury is the communicator, is the trickster, is the carrier of light between places. So get yourself a vial of mercury. Some of these things you can actually get, and it will illuminate it. You know, you can paint it, draw it, and so forth. But more than that, get a dictionary of myths or symbols. Google it, whatever. But, you know, and begin, there's something that Mercury has to teach you. And this is just, we've just gone in the treasure room. We haven't gone to talk about it. I didn't dare ask you, okay, what was unfinished that you found in there. But I will say that on one of my first journeys of this kind, eons ago, decades and decades ago, there was something, I had this difficult relationship that I was starting. I was back from the monastery, and I didn't understand why I was having so much trouble with this woman that I was in relationship with, and I was guided into a cave. And what I found in there was an Egyptian mummy. And I was really perplexed. I came out and I talked to this. I said, gee, that's funny, this Egyptian mummy. What could that possibly mean? And she tilted her head. She looked at me. She said, mummy. Now, what could that mean? So the psyche is also very playful, you know, and it's quite trustworthy, but it works in symbols, and you can begin to feel just this. I mean, we just went in the first layer of this enormous journey that you can start, or that many of you may be on. So I want to see if Katie has a few more things to add as we kind of come up to our concluding time this evening.
Well, I have found this very interesting.
Yes?
Yes.
I'm glad. What happened?
Oh. Well, I grew up, you know, with the idea that, good grief, you weren't going to talk about these things, and to find myself here with, you know, something like this.
Yes. An introvert's nightmare, basically.
Yes, you know, the introvert would like to stay anonymous.
Yes, yes,
And invisible if possible.
yes, yeah.
But to find, you know, that it's quite a pleasant experience.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad.
And also, I'm very grateful to know a little more about Buddhism.
Well, thank you. Thank you. How was it to go in the cave, by the way? Did that work at all?
It found very familiar.
It did? Yeah?
I think I've been in those caves.
Yeah, I could see that in some of your paintings.
I've been in those
Yeah.
caves. And I think at this time of life, well, I keep wondering why life isn't finished with me. You know, what I'm doing here, you know, at this age. And I think, well, life isn't finished with me yet.
I'm moved to hear you say it, and I have to say that I experience your presence, the clarity of your mind, the visions of what you painted to be more alive than a lot of people that I know who are way, way younger than you are.
And, you know, it's very interesting. Those paintings are now, for a long time, I thought, well, I'd painted them and I was done with them. They'd served their purpose. I'd talked to a therapist about them, you know. And they were pretty big, and they ended up with 63 of them. And I thought, what to do with these things? And there are two that I still keep on my wall. But the others, I finally decided, well, I could put them out in the cupboard in the garage. So I jammed them all out there, and it wasn't until my daughter came out and said, what are we to do with these when you're gone? And I said, you know, they're not worth anything to anybody else. But then there was pressure put on me after I gave a lecture, and had all 63 of them shown just briefly. And then the pressure came, one, to get them ready for the archives in San Francisco, and then the pressure to put that into a book. And that was agony. But it opened up a part of life that I never expected I would be drawn into a situation like this.
Here you are. Yeah.
And it's life enhancing.
Well, I also want to admire, I will say it, I would admire the courage that your journey took, but I think that's the wrong thing. Both the admiration and courage are the wrong words. You were forced to take this journey.
Indeed, I was.
And you were gifted by this journey as a wounded healer is gifted. Through your wounds to survive, you had to learn to take the journey as Jung did. He said, I had to learn to trust. I had no choice because I needed to come alive. I knew I was dead in some way, or the society. He talked a lot about how the society around him was dead. Religion wasn't doing, and people weren't really looking at what was happening.
That's true.
And there comes a kind of trust in this. Pablo Neruda wrote at one point, he said, you can pick all the flowers, but you can't stop the spring. And what I found for people in the meditative process, probably like in analysis that you speak of, people will come and they'll sit and they will finally sit down and face their loneliness and their anxiety and their fears and the image of their own death and sit with it and bring attention, mindful, respectful attention and compassion to that, and in some way make a relationship, even though it feels like they're dying. There's this whole process in meditation where it feels like you're dying, as in your paintings. Okay, dying, you go through that death. And if you're willing to wait and trust and
It's
go through
reborn.
that descent, something new always is born. It might feel like it takes 1,000,000 years inside. This woman whose rage destroyed the whole world and galaxy was there. It's all dark and dead and nothing ever is going to come back. And I said, well, wait a while. And her eyes were closed. We were doing this long meditation. And she said, how long? And I said, I don't know, 100 years, 1,000? Said, nothing. Okay, 1,000,000 years, 10,000,000 years, nothing. 500 million years, 5 minutes, meanwhile, has happened. Finally, she shakes her head. I said, what's that? Do you see something? She said, no. I said, okay, it's all dead. It's never going to come back. Another 500 million years, 3 more minutes go by. Okay. Shakes her head again. I said, what'd you see? She said, well, there's a little green light over there. Do you want to look at it? No. I said, well, why don't you just take a peek? So at the far edge of the galaxy, she said, yes, there's this one little green planet, and I can see the plants, after all this rage, after everything that seemed life-destroying, was actually allowed and faced, something beautiful and new wanted to be born.
And you know what I think, for me, the idea of age and death have assumed a depth of wonder and value, and it seems such a loss that those are that there is so little awareness of the value of old age and the completion of a life.
Yeah, thank you. Really, so beautiful. Thank you. If I may, I have one last thing to read, perhaps. And this is, I just have to sit for a moment with what you said. Because we're a society that doesn't want to honor our elders and doesn't want to face death. Everything has to be new.
And fights it.
Yeah. And so that fear keeps us running rather than allows us to live an authentic life. So this is a little bit related, and the last thing to say. A school principal liked to make sandwiches for the homeless people in her inner city neighborhood. Several days a week after school, if she wasn't tired, she took the pleasure of making sandwiches, peanut butter and jelly, bologna, roast beef, whatever she had, and would go down and distribute them to the people on the streets. And she didn't care if they thanked her or not. Sometimes they refused it. She wasn't doing it because it was the right thing, supposed to look good, but because she had the food and people were hungry. It came in some authentic way out of her. And after some time, the local media found out about this, and she became a kind of minor celebrity in her area. Inspired by her work, her fellow teachers and friends began to send her money for her ministry. To their surprise, they all received their money back with the short note that read, "Make your own damn sandwiches." Sand play therapy, depth of Buddhist meditation, Insight LA, which is, there are flyers and information, and which I'm doing a benefit for tomorrow, that has really wonderful, deep meditation programs, and I commend it to you very much. Jungian analysis, dream work, peyote ceremonies. Find your way, but you need it in these times, and we need it in these times, and you are really a carrier of that, so I thank you. Thank you all for coming. It's really a privilege. And take your